Welcome to Leadership from the Trenches with Mike Berry and Nicole Swan.
Welcome, everybody, to our part two podcast with Amanda Malave, MBA. And Amanda is, we learned last time, has worked at many of the big Fortune 100 companies, including, let's see if I can get all these right, Motorola, Microsoft, Dell, Apple, Amazon, and currently is working at another one of the big, large Fortune 100 companies. And so, got somebody here in the waiting room. We're going to invite them in. And Amanda, we're so glad to have you here again. My co-host, Nikki. Nikki, do you want to introduce yourself for a second?
Yeah, I am Nikki Swan. I am a leadership consultant, and I'm also Senior Director of Operations at Sundara Medical. Glad to be here.
Very good, great. And I should mention I'm a training coach for technology training of PMP classes and agile classes and software testing classes and stable classes and those kinds of things. All right, so back to Amanda. So Amanda, we thought we'd open up today kind of talking about strategies you've seen and maybe you've employed and you've also seen from the leaders around you at these companies for leading up and then maybe leading sideways with your peers and then leading down. So let's start with leading up first. What kind of exchanges have you had with some of the senior leadership and some of the people that direct these big, large companies that you've interacted with, that some observations you've made from these people that influenced you, both for better or maybe worse, if at all, that you could talk to us about?
Absolutely. First of all, aloha, Jason. I see someone joined. So aloha. Thank you. I think I'll just go in chronological order, not in order of importance, because every leader has had a imprint on my leadership style and my career, and I'm very, very appreciative and thankful for that. So I'll start off with Microsoft, though. Bill Gates was in the same building as me, and I was a fixed accountant at Microsoft. One of the things I learned from Bill Gates is that he always wanted people to stay nimble. So if you stayed in a job more than maybe a year and a half to two, something was wrong. And you were considered like stagnant. So he wanted you to be like a holistic leader, especially if you were considered like high potential. So I went from licensing and doing derivatives to Latin America. Then they had me do fixed asset accounting. And some people would think that was boring, but I actually found it incredibly interesting because at times Bill Gates, because I was in charge of all the assets, right? So at time Bill Gates would look at my reports that would take me hours to look or days to create in my leadership team to review. The thing that fascinated me the most was that he could look at it and pinpoint exactly where the error was. His brain was always, perhaps because he knew the entire infrastructure, his brain knew exactly where to look at. And one of the things that taught me is how to take feedback from someone's at such a big level and not be crumbled, because you have to act fast and resolve things. Usually they're not calling out things, oh, hey, you did a great job. They're calling things out that we've done incorrectly and we have to resolve. So from that perspective, it's like every, leadership, a lot of people think you have to be so high level. I think you have to be both. You have to be detailed and know what people are doing all the way from, the fixed asset accountant all the way to the, VP of sales, and then everything from on the side too. So from that perspective, I learned details are important and you have to know up and down exactly what's going on. Yeah. The other thing yes, go ahead.
I was going to make a comment on that. I know in the Navy, Admiral Rickover was a really interesting person in naval history. He's what they call the father of the atomic navy, and he was actually an electrical engineer that was very excellent leader, manager, and nobody in our government wanted to fund atomic research to put in military vehicles. So he he got together with some big engineering firms and said, "Look, I don't have a budget for this, but I know this could be built. If you want to build it and prove that it works, we'll buy lots of them from you." And so he talked some engineering firms into making, atomic engines for our aircraft carriers and submarines, and enabled them to be at sea for years, literally, without being needing to be refueled. But he became very famous for his ability to get things done, and particularly knock down barriers inside of a company. And his philosophy was exactly what you just said. He said, to be an effective leader, you have to have the big picture, and you do that through all the project status report stuff. But you also have to have a good handle on what's going on at the detail level. And one-on-ones are how you do that. You just make sure you have a personal conversation with all of your important people on your project teams, as well as the big overall meetings with project statuses. And those personal conversations, whether it's a structured one-on-one or some other mechanism, are how you keep tabs on all the detailed stuff too. So it kind of dovetails into what you were just saying that you saw.
Yes, I think Bill Gates went even further than that. He was auditing a simple report, perhaps what the area I was working on, which was the first SAP implementation and accounting for all of our fixed assets. That's, very important. But he actually went into like specific fixed asset accounting reports. So he dove into the details, and perhaps that was his process. He's very metrics orientated. And when you're metrics oriented, you also have to make sure you're auditing the results. Are you going to take everything at face value, or maybe you pick one or two areas that I'll do a quick audit and make sure that everybody's also keeping up on their toes, right? Because they know that perhaps I will be requested to provide all the details.
Interesting. Okay. So he didn't just take your reports, but he would maybe spot check some things and have maybe a third party or third department or some helper or something audit the numbers also and make sure that the numbers are all looking pretty good.
Absolutely. And that brings me to Amazon. From that perspective, Jeff Bezos was heavily involved. And one of their core tenets was that you had to know strategy, but you also had to know the details. And so when you're presenting anything to him or to leadership, you have to know exactly what all your people are doing under as well. You have to probably know better than them. So a lot of people sometimes hide behind leadership, whereas these two companies, which are very metrics oriented and very prosperous, went into the details and were heavily engaged, especially with escalations. Early on, Jeff Bezos, if there was an escalation, I was in charge of Amazon Fresh and the head of sales operations for that. We were trying to get stores or deliveries, from Amazon to people's homes directly. And so from that perspective, he was super heavily involved, and always we had this high access to all the information. So every Wednesday, our VPs and all the other VPs across the company would hold a metrics review where everybody in the org had to come. Things like salaries were disclosed because it's part of the budget.
Is that right?
Absolutely, right? So what you realize, though, is you may have a high salary, but man, you have high responsibility. But the point here, too, is that if there's escalations, especially from customers or outside of the company, Jeff Bezos would just send you an email with a question mark on it. And if you receive that, you better know that there was an issue there, and you only had 24 hours to resolve. So one of the things I learned is Jeff Bezos at that point in time, had an army of 40,000 employees, and they all had similar personalities and tenets, built on trust, built on metrics, built on strategy, built on people who are detail oriented, but could argue, but agree and commit to each other. Everything was about trust. And how do you get a company to be so nimble and completely address an issue, a simple issue or a big issue, within 24 hours? Number one, because it's accountability. And number two is that it didn't matter what it was, we could figure it out within a day or two. So sometimes I think about the government or education or any particular issue. Like, what would Amazon do? That he would, Jeff Bezos would send a question mark. How are we going to fix the homeless issue? Question mark. You had to come up with a solution within 24 hours. So it's just very interesting to me that all the leaders were very metrics orientated. All were very hands-on. Michael Dell was probably the most hands-on of all of them. He actually sat with all of us. He didn't have offices at all, except for maybe himself as an executive level for press releases. But he was down in the trenches, and we all had cubicles. It was like a warehouse environment. And I would see him on Fridays bringing Chick-fil-A or giving me handing me a sundae or whatever it was. He was very, very engaged and visible. But again, he probably took the metrics to a whole different level. He posted the metrics and made every single person at Dell become Six Sigma certified. Wow. So yes. Wow. And so we were all very process oriented, very metrics oriented, and very in sync of what we were doing. And then he was heavily engaged by going down, in the trenches. He could hear things, talk to people, build trust, right? So he was constantly auditing, probably more than anyone else that I've seen in the past, because he would come down on a constant basis.
So he was visible and present with you guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I know, Nikki, we've learned in the past from interviewing people in the past how important that is, that leaders are actually with their people on a regular basis and not some abstract role in a corner office behind a closed door, most of the time. It's really important for them to be with their people. Yeah. I wanted to ask you more about what you said about the metrics. I know there's Andy Grove, who was one of the big players at Intel, kind of started the whole objectives and key results movement, and he kind of created this concept of a North Star, kind of like where your company should be heading, and then you might have different strategies that shift over time to get you there. But and then there were the whole company should have basically the same objectives. But you get to establish at different levels what the key results would be to equal those objectives. And can you talk to that? Did you guys do anything like that at these companies you worked for, where the whole company was working together towards objectives and there were key results that were written down and reported on quarterly or something?
Absolutely. Like I think all of the most diligent of them all was Michael Dell, right? So we would have these high level objectives, one of them being everyone, is Six Sigma certified, and then it would be measured and then also communicated across the organization for visibility at, the most granular levels of where we were. So you always knew what you were working on, you always knew what the results were, but you also knew the aggregate result as well. So right now at the company I'm at, they do OKRs, which key results, and so from that perspective, because they're doing so many things that are life-changing or perhaps even not able to be discussed, a lot of it can't be disclosed. So there's that synergy of knowing how things kind of roll up or how you impact an organization are not always as visible. So that's one of the, maybe roadblocks to some of these more innovative companies. Same thing with Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos' secret was that, he could always show a great balance sheet or income statement, and he didn't have to necessarily disclose all of these little orgs that he had. They were secret orgs for new products that were coming out. And what he would do is he would give one VP a certain budget, but then you only kind of knew what you were doing in that little group. So that didn't always resonate as much as it did with me for Michael Dell. And then I also worked at Apple with and from that perspective, Steve Jobs was not focused so much on metrics, which is very interesting, right? He was more focused on the experience, the product. So it's more of a product-driven organization. Of course, you're measuring sales, but it was all about customer experience, escalations, and so you could be very successful as well, not necessarily measuring all the financial or at a granular level, but more at the customer experience, product releases, etc. And I also deployed a lot of products. I actually deployed the first iPhone. I actually was called in on a Sunday, given 24 hours to read the materials. I was in charge of the sales center and the first Genius bar. I had to read it, and then I had to go in the next morning and communicate verbally what they had to know. And within like 30 minutes, we launched. So, from that perspective, you can't always tell everyone what you're doing and have metrics to measure it. But then we would measure the success of how many sales we would have in the first hour, or how many escalations, or how many people needed the Genius bar. And the reason we created the Genius bar at Apple was because we knew that this iPhone was so different than any other iPhone, and it didn't come with like a bunch of instructions that people may need to understand and schedule time to kind of get that phone started.
Can you tell us, Amanda, what the Genius Bar is for the Android users?
The Genius Bar is what the Apple stores are today. Okay. You go in, you have a technical expert that will walk you through the process. Because we didn't have a bunch of Apple stores at the time when we first launched the iPhone, we created the Genius Bar in Elk Grove, California, in a warehouse, and it was like 12 of my employees that were very technical. That the salespeople would then schedule a time to have that person walk them through the iPhone setup, or if it was an escalation, we actually serviced very high political people and executives and movie stars like Madonna. They would actually get in front of the queue and would actually be transferred over directly.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Wow. So tell us about with the metrics. What would happen when some of the numbers were bad? Would people get in trouble, or was it more like it was constructive? What happened next was very constructive when there were some metrics that were unfavorable that showed up.
That really depends on the leader, right? Not necessarily like at Bill Gates level. At Microsoft at the time, when I helped launch Xbox. I won't say who the VP was, but I didn't meet my metrics, and he got very upset. And threw a chair across the room. So from that perspective, what do you do in that case? It's just metrics, but you got to have tough skin, and then you just got to come back with the resolution. And do you get in trouble? I think, again, it depends on the leader, but yes, I think you're there to meet a metric. And if you're not meeting that metric, you need to have a plan and a backup plan and plan A, B, C, and D of how you're going to get there. So because I didn't meet my metrics, I then came up with the process of, well, why don't we go and launch a technical and sales integrated center for Xbox, and to reduce costs, why don't we do it like right near the border of Mexico and the United States, where we know that the resources could also service our Spanish customers. And so sometimes your failures can can bring up a lot of ideas. And one thing that I learned in my MBA program is that no one will drive change unless they're in a very catastrophic point or decision point, or they're failing. And
Yeah.
so when I felt I was failing at Microsoft, even though perhaps that particular leader didn't express it in the best way, what it did do was it resulted in me coming up with really innovative issues of how can I fix this, and how can I fix this fast, and how can I make it so amazing that it actually becomes a great outcome. And
Yeah.
so from that, I actually received an award from Bill Gates. It's called the Ship It Award, because we shipped one of the first Xboxes, and my voice, because I speak Spanish, was on the first Xbox IVR.
Is that right?
Yes.
Amazing.
So, you can be in the doghouse 1 minute and be the superstar the next minute. I think it's just like sales. You're just as good as yesterday's results.
But Amanda, the organization had to be created in such a way that would allow you to do the kind of thing that you did, right? To take something that wasn't, that wasn't happening right, and then transform it into something so extraordinary. So what was in place in Microsoft that allowed you to create what you did? What was happening organizationally?
You were not micromanaged. You could literally decide what you needed to do. We also shared a lot of information. What I did that Friday night after that happened, I spent the whole Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at the office. I remember my son was very small, and I picked him up and he came to my office, and then he scribbled all over my walls because he wanted to go home. But I went, and because there was sharing of information, I went and I looked at different things that other people had done, to resolve problems. And I read a lot of information there. And then I came up with my own plan and put it in a document and shared it as well, and then presented it. I think it's important when you are, I think it would have been better if I was proactive. I was young then, very young. I was 27, 28 years old. So from that perspective, I learned that I needed to proactively communicate if I'm not meeting a metric, so that that doesn't occur. But at the same time, I learned that you have to have plans and document at least a short-term strategy and a long-term strategy for anything that's really critical, and have that always in the back of your pocket, because now metrics are everything.
Wow, that's really great insight. Can you talk about dashboards and dashboarding, and what, I heard somebody told me once that what you really want to do is create some kind of dashboard where the people you report up to can just look at your dashboard and see the status of things, so they don't have to chase you around all the time wondering how things are going. And that frees up their time to help grow the business, which is what senior people should be doing. Can you talk to that at all? Is that good advice, not good advice? Did you see that kind of thing happening, or do you see something else happening?
Oh, absolutely. I saw dashboards all the time. The company I'm at now is dashboards on steroids. So everyone is super technical, and they all know how to code. And we have the tools available that we can build and share code and build dashboards very easily for anything. The issue here is that there's sometimes too many dashboards. And so what's the source of truth? So one of the things that we're evolving to is, how do you consolidate dashboards, and what are the questions that you want to answer, and what are your audiences? So we spend a lot of time building dashboard specs so that it answers all the questions. And then we do these reviews where everyone gets invited to participate and provide feedback, so that you don't just rely on what you know, but there might be something that might be missing. So dashboards are absolutely critical. I've just never seen dashboards collaborated and created in such a collaborative fashion, and that everyone has the same technical skill set, where anyone can go and look at the SQL code and figure out how to grab the data and present it themselves as well. So the interesting part, at where I work at now is if you don't get it right, then somebody else can just will go build it themselves. So you have to really make sure that you collaborate and try to get it 90% correct for most of the audience, because you don't want to waste other people's time by them having to go and create their own. But dashboards are super critical. But they have to be accurate. That's one of the issues that sometimes happens is one person will think about it this way and one person will think about it that way. So documenting your sources of data, documenting your audit process, and disclosing that within the dashboard is super critical too. But I've built dashboards now, like that's like part of my normal life. I know that no matter what project I'm in, I'm going to have to be creating a dashboard that's accurate, that answers key questions, that is digestible, and that has relevant information.
So speaking of efficiency and using tools in order to achieve that in an organization, I know right now your expertise is AI, that's the world you're living in right now with this organization that you're working with. Can you talk a little bit about how you use this, how this organization is employing this, as much as you feel comfortable talking about that? And
dashboards?
No, AI. Yeah.
Oh, I can't really disclose too much about how what we're using where I currently work at, but I can disclose how I use AI in my day-to-day work, inside and outside, business. So, as I had told you, dashboards are super important here, and SQL is the code of choice. And because there's so much data sets, the SQL can get very complicated. So I use Gemini on a daily basis, probably 10 to 20 times a day, just for code. If I have a thought about what I want to do, I start off with like asking it, well, how would you build a foundational code for this? I don't disclose like key information. I sometimes will put like X as a field or a column to be safe. But Gemini is like super important to me. And I also talked about that I also have to create documents a lot, expressing how I came up with the strategy, or what is my process for compliance, for the DMA Act, Digital Marketing Act for AI, or even an idea that I might have. I use AI on a constant basis to rewrite things, make it better. I have key prompts that I use, and it really does help me. And I think you can also use it, and I have used it to create a project plan, to then create an analysis of the requirements and what should be, must-have, should-haves, must-have leveling, what things, and I love to ask Gemini, what am I missing?
Wow.
And what I'm missing is usually the most important part. So one of the things that I'm doing right now which is AI governance, risk, and controls, is we're looking at how do you make sure that the objective of the model, the AI model that you are building, or that person is building, is meeting key requirements and is ethical and is risk-free. So I went and I looked at best practices. IBM Watson has an amazing tool that they created this systematic approach. And I went in and I looked at all of their definitions. I put those definitions into Google AI. IBM had found like 70, and then Gemini AI found another 88 possible issues. And the reason being is because it's like the super brain that sees everything that has ever been written about that topic, and can then define it if I'm missing anything from my thought process. So I think if you use it ethically and carefully, it can be a friend. What I also really learned about AI working here is that, so why doesn't the company I work for, why don't they just use AI to replace me or the whole project team that we have if it's so smart, right? And what I learned is that AI is great, but it's not at times super creative for problem solving. So it's only sometimes as good as how you put your questions or how you phrase them, and at times it can have mistakes or not be exactly what you wanted. So it's the creativity of the human being in how it's interacting that's super critical. So to stay relevant in the AI world, you have to be the creator. And then AI is like your, co-pilot. I love that, Microsoft calls it co-pilot because that's exactly what it is. It's your co-pilot in this journey. Transactional things can be easily replaced, but complex, SQL queries, how would it even know that that's what you had to do or where to look? It has to be driven by a person. The other really great, that's AI models, but what I'm really interested in is healthcare, and the environment in general, and what I've been learning about AI is that there's like these 3D virtual worlds, synthetic data that could be used for healthcare to, reduce the time that you find a medical or a new medicine by like 13 years. It usually takes like 20 years to get something approved. And by reducing by 13 years, how many lives do you save? The where we're going and what the future is in AI is just amazing. But it's going to require a lot of governance and ethics and ability to protect the data of those individuals. In the future, we're going to have it so that you can go to your doctor and they will do a virtual, they will create a virtual you in their system, grab all of your medical information because now they all have it right in their medical databases that they all share. And then they can get all of your medical results. And then based off of that, they can say, tell me what is the best medication and simulate Amanda taking medication A or B or C, and which one's going to get the best results.
Wow.
So imagine if someone with cancer knows that they don't have to take chemo, or that this chemo is or this medicine is better. I mean, days matter. So decision making that is quick and personalized is going to be the next generation of healthcare. And so I see a lot of cool stuff where I work at, which I'm not going to disclose, but these things I'm talking about are pretty public, and things that I don't know if people are always looking at it or taking the risk to get there, but that's where we're going. So healthcare has to be really nimble and be able to get there. So there's also these simulations are also moving towards gaming. So simulations will look like an Xbox game, for example. So it's really, really interesting where we're going, what we're using, and how we're creating it so it's easily digestible and trusted. Did that answer your question? Because that was a long one, but AI is just such a complex thing. But I think that you can stay relevant if you continue to be creative and take risks.
It's fascinating. What are the situations where use of AI is unethical or inappropriate in a traditional workplace?
I think what we call ethics is how you're training your model. So the person that's training the model is really the brains behind the model. So it gives it like prompts and information and teaches it how to make decisions. So what if somebody is unethical or biased? That's one of the things that we're always looking at. And so that's why you have to create these guardrails, these objectives for, we call it's a like one pager where the person creating the model has to tell us what they're going to do and what's their intent. And then we audit it across the whole entire process to ensure that all of our ethics are components are actively addressed. The seriousness of what data you use. Our researchers have access to all the data at the highest levels. So, are you ethically using the data? How are you disclosing it? How are you deleting it? How are you retaining it? All of those things matter. When you're using like Gemini on a personal basis, or I think that you just have to understand not to put your personal information there, or other people's personal information there. There's a lot of guardrails built in, but people are always looking to see what it can do, or what it break, or will it break. I've been using AI for almost 2 years now, and when it first came out, you could ask it anything. Now it's got a lot of guardrails, but it's a good thing because it's trying to protect people, trying to protect society, and it's still debatable whether it's got its own consciousness or not, but it sure does make some amazing decisions, and then it makes some questionable decisions, just like a human.
Jason, do you have any questions?
So thank you for the opportunity to listen in. It was amazing to hear from them. So thank you so much, and just to learn about your experiences and interactions, in your previous companies. That was always great to hear stories on that journey, from everybody.
Yeah.
So thank you.
In Hawaii, we call that talk story. We're talking story.
Story.
Mhm.
I did have, well, I mean, I know we're out of time, but I did have one question going back to that, where, you were going through some of these extraordinary places that you've worked and these extraordinary leaders you were able to work with. And the question always comes to me when I hear about these leaders and the things that they do and their reach way down deep into the organization, where they can be present here and they can be present down here. How do they have the time to do that all? How do they get their own initiatives done? What do you know about how they manage their time and lives that'll enable them to be in so many places at one time, seemingly? Do you know?
It's an obsession being at work, I think. If you look at their personal lives now, 20 years later, for each of the people I just spoke about, they gave up a lot.
You're right.
And so from that perspective, if you think about even Steve Jobs, what did he think of at the end? Was it all worthwhile? Did money give you everything? And so, from that perspective, what I learned is you have to have some sort of balance. I'm a little obsessed myself when I get into like healthcare or something that's really going to impact the world. So I have to be careful of that too. But perhaps that's one of the reasons I like where I am, because I can have that balance. I can do interesting work. Sometimes you can go much farther than you currently are, but there's a lot of give and take there. So finding that balance of that you're comfortable with and that you could live with, and that if something does happen, that you don't have regrets, I think is super important. I believe that all the leaders I talked about they have talked about, their regrets. But at the same time, they've had high impact to society as well.
Yeah. What are some sources that people good sources to learn about writing prompts and things like that for AI?
So there's I learned how to code and how to fix my toilet, how to fix a car, and how to work with AI or anything new on YouTube, believe it or not. People love to share information. That's one. But I also think it's just practicing. But last but not least, I just ask AI, hey, I want to do this. What's the best prompt that I can use?
Wow.
And then I just keep a log of all my prompts, and they get better and better and better. And I keep asking it periodically when I'm engaging with it. What am I missing? Is there a better prompt? You can even ask it right now. Give me the top 10 prompts for project management to create a project plan.
Wow.
And it would give that to you. You can ask it, I'm about to have an interview. Here's a job description. Tell me what the behavioral based questions are going to be based off of the last 3 months of information, because you don't want it to be, irrelevant. And then also give me the best answer based off of current profiles in LinkedIn.
Wow.
I mean, you can get that granular. I mean, and then I usually make it and then put it all in a matrix, and so it will put it all into Google Sheets.
Sure.
So you can basically things that would take me hours, 10 hours, can be done in a few minutes.
Yeah. Wow. That's great.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah, it is. Well, thanks, Amanda. We're out of time, so we're gonna end this. But again, it's been a pleasure. So glad you're here with us. Thank you so much for your knowledge and experience. It's fascinating listening to you share it.
I thank you again. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, but I don't think I'm that interesting. But okay.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, it'd be fun to do it the third time too. All right.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Nikki. I guess that's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
Mahalo.